Welcome to another edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. We are excited that you have joined us, and we're going to take a fascinating journey, and we're going to talk about aviation on this edition. And Bubba, we talk about some of the stuff on the show so much. Tom Messer is our guest, and let me tell you something. Tom has been around for a while, been flying since '65. Has over 20,000 hours in the air, worked as an air traffic controller for 27 years, retired in '99. His son is a current controller out of Birmingham. And let me tell you, he has some incredible stories, and he also can give us insight on a lot of questions that come up on the show involving some of the more famous crashes that have taken place. So, Tom, welcome, first of all, to Rick and Bubba University, the podcast.
Thank you so much, and good morning.
Yeah, so let's talk about, give us the Tom Messer story. How in the world did you end up as a pilot, as a air traffic controller? What's the history of how you got into all this?
Well, as a small child in Jasper, Alabama, I loved airplanes, and the airport was not very far from my home, and I rode my bicycle to the airport on weekends, and the pilots that flew the small airplanes sat outside, and they chatted about aviation, and I listened to them, and they'd take me flying from time to time with them, so I got the bug. I started flying at 16, and got my private pilot's license, went to Auburn University, was in the aviation management program there. I got some more ratings at Auburn, went in the Navy after I got out of Auburn, did not fly in the Navy, but got some more ratings there. When I got out of the Navy, I had a commercial multi-instrument rating. I got my CFI through the GI Bill, and I got a citation jet type rating on the GI Bill in 1974. And just through some benefactors and people that took me under their wing early on, I was able to go to King Air School, flew for a company out in Jasper for a little while, and on a trip to Birmingham one day, back in the day when you could walk into the terminal and walk around and visit the control tower, and I walked over to the tower and visited the tower chief there. They call them managers now, but they were chiefs back in those days. He took a liking to me and helped me get on to the test to take for an air traffic controller. Got hired into Birmingham, worked there for 27 years. In 1978, that was in 74, in 78, I went to the Flight Standards Division of FAA. There I gave pilot check rides, investigated accidents and incidents, and part of my duties were to surveil air traffic or air taxi operators. So I got the experience through the FAA to do that, and in 84, I did a air taxi operation, started with a Baron, but within a year, I had a Cessna citation on my charter certificate. While I was still an air traffic controller, I grew that business to be the largest air taxi operation in the state of Alabama. And in 1999, having both the air taxi operation and being a controller, I retired from the FAA as an air traffic controller, put my time into my air taxi operation, and then in the early 2010 or so, I decided to give up the air taxi side of it just due to complications with dealing with the paperwork, bureaucracy. And I went into aircraft management, and at the current time, I manage corporate-owned airplanes for companies that have jet airplanes or turboprop airplanes that don't want to have their own flight operation. They don't want to employ pilots, and they don't want to deal with maintenance and hangaring and insurance. They just turn those airplanes over to my company. We manage them on their behalf. And then there are a few other companies around that we provide pilot service to help them fly their airplanes.
Wow.
So that's it in a nutshell.
What a nutshell it was. I mean,
that's quite a run.
It is full. So you did spend time as an air traffic controller. And to me, I'm fascinated by air traffic control.
I'm amazed that they can keep up with everything that's going on up there because it looks like there's a lot of planes in the air.
Yeah, and you told me something, and Bubba, this was very, very interesting. You said from your experience of watching air traffic controllers, there's a certain giftedness that comes with it, obviously.
There is.
And it really doesn't, it's not really tied to education. You said you saw some of the most educated that couldn't quite get it down, and then some high school educated that did really well. And what did you see? Could you pick up on a few things that usually were an indication this person was going to be pretty good?
Well, I did notice, and I told you earlier about it, but it seemed that a controller who had some musical talent did well as a controller, and it's a brain thing. And I'll just briefly say what I said before. You can take a piano and you can put sheet music up and you say, this is a note, this is how long it gets for the beat, this is the piano keys, you strike them, and you can teach someone all there is to know about a piano, and some can play and some can't. And I see that same thing, or saw it, with controllers. You could put the handbook in front of them, you could give them classroom, you could teach them all the procedures and separation requirements. You could show them a radar, you could show them out the window that this is the airport and these are taxiways. And some of them were able to just be excellent controllers, and some just couldn't quite get it. And it was my piano analogy that you can teach. Some people have the ability and some just don't have the ability.
And you notice, though, that if they had musical ability,
they seem to do better.
They seem to adapt to it better.
Yeah.
They had a rhythm.
Yeah, there's
internal clock.
And that is exactly what it is. It's rhythm.
And well, it's a lot to keep up with. So we certainly want to talk to you about some of the more famous, crashes.
Well, let me ask a couple more when it comes to air traffic control, because I'm being a ham radio operator. I have a radio in my vehicle, and I have it programmed to listen to the airport. And I enjoy hearing, of course, here, and when I travel, there's several around that I enjoy listening to. But a lot of times, it seems to me like the air traffic controllers are talking like the people on the drive-through at the restaurant. It's not the clearest audio you would want. Yeah. And I've asked some of the pilots, I said, how in the world do you tell what they're going to say? And they tell me they anticipate what they're going to say. So then when they hear it and it's not really clear, they know still what they said.
A lot of times there's a lot of verbiage, but they're just key words in that long spiel.
Right.
So you're listening for an altitude or a heading or cleared to land or clear for takeoff. There are specific words in that instruction that they're really keyed up to listen to.
Well, it just seems to me that they would speak a little slower and clearer,
and as a student pilot or a low-time pilot, you can ask them to talk slower. Or I'm a student pilot. Can you give me a little more time to understand that?
Especially when we're down Highway 280 where we live, and if I'm visiting my son that lives in Auburn, I always enjoy listening. They have a flight school there you'd mentioned.
Oh yeah,
right.
And boy, I hear a lot of them, and they they'll give the tail numbers of the plane, and they say Auburn student at the end of it.
Right. Well, at Birmingham, for instance, there are 7 or 8 different positions, different frequencies that are being talked on all the time. There's clearance delivery, ground control. What you think of as the tower, which clears for takeoff and landing,
right.
They call that local control.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's approach control, departure control. There's satellite airports in the Birmingham area. A lot of people don't realize that at Birmingham, they work approaches into Tuscaloosa, Anniston, Gadsden, Talladega. There are no towers there. There's a tower in Tuscaloosa. But if the weather is bad, they work the instrument approaches into those airports.
That is amazing.
That the instrument driving, and we'll get to that, flying is where. That's where you get into the novice versus the expert. That's when that all this training really comes into play. And we come back. We want to talk a little bit about some of these things that happen. The JFK incident. You can definitely unpack that for us.
So you're just going to go right to crash.
Well, we got Malaysia, and we're going to talk about.
That's going to build everybody's confidence.
Well, we're going to come back. Well, he's going to tell us what happened.
Cancel the flight.
And how these things could have been avoided. And he's also going to shed some light on new technology that if we had this technology when the Malaysian flight went down, we likely could have found it.
Yeah, we got to talk to you about
we're
that
talk
because
about that.
I'm kind of that one kind of spooks me a little bit. I just feel like we should have known what happened to that.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you why.
So, there's so many years of expertise that Tom can bring to the table. We'll talk about the state of commercial airlines right now with these potential pilot strikes continuing. How trying to schedule all that runs aground, and I know how frustrating that can be for all of us traveling sometime. He can shed some light on what actually is happening and taking place. When Rick and Bubba University, the podcast continues.
This is the Rick and Bubba Show. Watch more at blazetv.com/Rick and Bubba. Rick and Bubba, Rick and Bubba.
All right, so Bubba, let's talk just a little bit about life insurance. I mean, this is really tying into the show today.
Yeah, it really is, especially if you're about to fly.
Well, true. Here's the bottom line. People try to overcomplicate life insurance. It's become so convoluted. And what Ladder is saying is, can we just simplify this and get the process down to what really matters anyway? And what really matters is if I die before my loved ones and I'm the insured and they are the recipients of the insurance payment, are they going to get paid? And how much are they going to get paid? The rest of it is just, it seems like a lot of busy work for nothing. And listen to this number with Ladder. You talk about simplifying life insurance. And remember, hey, Rick and Bubba know, the older you get, the more it costs.
Yeah,
okay, so make a move on this now, and the more complicated it gets too. Ladder is 100% digital, no doctors, no needles, no paperwork when you apply for $3 million in coverage or less. So you thought that was going to be a lower ceiling. I mean, all the way up to $3 million, you don't really have to see the doctor, do needles, paperwork, just a few questions answered about your health in an application, and then they use their algorithms to get it done. Ladder's customers rate them 4.8 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot, and they made, Bubba, Forbes' best life insurance list in 2021.
There you go.
So just a few minutes, a phone or a laptop, and you can apply. All right, so go right now, ladderlife.com/Rick Bubba. Do that today. See if you're instantly approved. LADDER life.com/Rick Bubba. Put our names together. Ladderlife.com/Rick Bubba. Tom Messer is our guest today on this edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. He is a very experienced pilot, a retired air traffic controller, and can bring a lot to the table. So, do you want to go Malaysia first, or do you want to go JFK Jr.?
Let's go. Either one. It doesn't matter.
So, Tom, let's talk, and come a little bit closer to that mic there. Let's talk Malaysia. So, give us your expert opinion, and we still don't know what happened, do we? But talk about why we can't seem to get those answers.
The airplane took off from the mainland. I can't remember exactly where it took off from. And at the time, that was 2014, I believe. At the time, there was only radar. And radar does two things in determining where an airplane is. There's skin paint, where the beam actually hits the airplane and returns. And then there's a device on the airplane called a transponder that, when interrogated, sends the altitude and some information back. Radar is line of sight, and if you've ever been sitting on the beach and you see a boat go over the horizon and disappear, the same thing happens with radar. When the airplane goes over the curvature of the Earth and gets over on the backside,
so the Earth's not flat?
It is not flat.
Okay.
I don't believe.
Yeah, well,
you got a pretty good look at it.
I've been high enough to see the curve, so I believe there is a curve there.
So, but when the plane goes over that, then
it can no longer interrogate it. In like the United States, there's a system of radars, and as the airplane goes across the country, it goes from one radar station to another, and it's constantly in radar contact with air traffic control facility. Back when the Malaysia occurred, when the airplane got out over both the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, they got no returns from it, so they didn't know where it was. There was a device on the airplane that was satellite-based that the engines on board the airport reported to the manufacturer every 15 minutes or so the condition of the engines. So they were able to use that a little bit, but there was times that they didn't get those reports back. Today, and back to the Malaysia, they just don't know where they went.
Right.
There was no way to track them. There was probably no cell phone. Airplanes now, you can make a cell phone call back in the airplane, but back at that time, this airplane may not have been equipped, so the people in the back didn't know what was going on. But now we have, it's called ADSB, it's Automated Dependent Surveillance, and there is a device on the airplane now that transmits to a satellite the GPS position, and it is a form of type radar that air traffic controllers are using, and it will be the web that encircles the Earth, basically, in the future, that any airplane anywhere at any altitude, they'll be able to see it because it will be reporting through a satellite system. They didn't have that then, and basically, when the airplane got out over the middle of the ocean, there was no way to communicate. The VHF radios on board the airplane that they talk on are line of sight. They would have had satellite navigation, but some reason those pilots were not in contact with anybody. They could have talked over a sat phone, but they didn't. So there may have been some pilot collusion in that. There obviously was, or somebody.
Don't they think somebody, because something had to be turned off? Some of that.
Maybe, maybe not, because they were in an area where
just not good coverage.
Just not good coverage.
Tom, it just seems to me in a time where we have the Defense Department has such good satellite coverage. I mean, the Chinese can't stick a shovel in a pile of dirt at an ICBM site that we don't know about it.
Right.
It just seems like somebody would have a picture of that thing and then it's gone and we would know where it was.
Well, there's all the conspiracy theories through the years that they claim they've got pictures of it on an island out, but they did find parts of that airplane that washed up that they were able to identify as parts of that airplane. And that was in the Indian Ocean, so it went down somewhere in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, it hit the water somewhere. We just don't know why.
That's
but didn't they think the co-pilot had some issues or something? Hadn't that come out more?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Yeah, but either they had no coverage or somebody chose not to use the satellite phone.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And they're not, and
that was the only way we could have
the last few reports that they got as to where the airplane was pretty much at the end of the fuel exhaustion period for the airplane. They knew how much fuel it had on it and how long it could fly.
There was only so far it could go.
That's right.
And you draw that circle, and then you look inward. I saw, too, where one guy, and I can't remember where he was from. I was trying to find the report. He had actually used, crazy as it sounds, ham radio beacons from around the world, and was looking for blips in that, meaning that the plane had interrupted that for just a second. And it's really, it's kind of a high-tech way to see a stealth plane.
Right.
In other words, if you have a constant background RF, you look for the hole, and that means something's flying through it. And he had said he knew where it went down, but I think they'd run out of money searching the ocean floor at the time.
A lot of time, energy, and money that was spent. There was another expedition that launched after the governments gave it up, a private looking for it. The water's very deep, and it's a big ocean.
Yes.
It's a lot of water, but what you're saying is with today's technology, we would have found it.
That's correct. Unless it got turned off somehow or another.
Right, but I'm talking about, let's take all of the conspiracy theories out.
Right,
correct. If it had just crashed for mechanical failure or whatever.
Correct.
If it had crashed and the pilots were not in collusion, there was none of that, we would know where it was.
That's correct.
Now, is that on all planes now being manufactured, or?
The ADSB, yes. It's required in the United States. It's required in most countries in the world There are a few that are working toward it, but it will eventually be worldwide.
You were talking about the pinging of the engine data. I think that's amazing technology that they can keep up with their own engines and look at that. And it's really for them to tell what's running good, what's not running good to help your design. I mean, you can't get better data than in-flight.
That's correct.
Telemetry on your engine as it happens, and then they're doing that for every flight. I mean, they've got a massive amount of data.
That's correct.
For correcting those things.
Somebody's looking at you all the time.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
It's kind of like our doctors.
Right. Well, and I know that you said this show that is called Air Disasters, you're not a fan.
I am not.
And you're not a fan of that for what reason?
The over-dramatization. Pilots have the deer in the headlights look every time something happens. They're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? I don't know. And pilots do know. They have a good... they're trained. They do simulator training. They've been through almost all the scenarios that can ever happen in the airplane. They will set out to fix the problem. A lot of times in accidents, it's compounding problems. There's one simple problem, they may begin to work on it, and then it gets worse and worse, and it gets beyond their ability. Fire can get beyond your ability.
Right.
And
fire's bad.
Yes, fire's bad. That's my biggest fear as a pilot in an airplane is a fire. But for $100 on those shows, it seems like to me they could hire a retired air traffic controller and a retired pilot and get the phraseology right and take the wow out of it and just tell what happened.
Oh, but they got to have the wow. That's what makes a TV show.
So you're saying that's the part when they're doing the drama part of it, where it's actors. You can still do actors and make it sound more authentic, right?
I feel like you could.
Right. Yeah. I bet you you won't even watch it, will you?
But I take that and I move that across the whole news spectrum. When I see something, a movie or a TV show or a news report on aviation, and I see it handled so poorly, I wonder about all that other stuff that I don't know anything about. Should I believe it or not?
Yeah, well, I think we all struggle with that every day.
Yeah, if they don't have this right, what else do they not have right?
One of the shows, and you may remember this one. I don't remember what flight it was. It was overseas somewhere, but it was one of the larger planes, and they were coming in to land in just a torrential rain. And they had an engine failure, which I guess the most dangerous time with any airplane is right as you're landing. And they lost an engine, they lost the other, They ended up in a crash, terrible deal. But they went back and studied it, and of course these engines are designed to work in rain.
Correct.
I mean, you have rain sometimes.
Correct.
But the fact that they had slowed down the engine and the RPMs to land, it had never been tested at a low speed, and the water just simply drowned the engine out. And I thought that was very interesting. Of course, they've made changes to it now, so that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But I always thought that was a very interesting phenomenon.
That could happen. The compressor blades, that big fan that's up in the front, throws the water to the side of the engine, and there is a duct that goes around, and very little of the water actually goes into the hot section of the turbine that makes the power.
Right.
In our big turbofan engines that we have now, 60% of the power is made through that duct going around the hot air coming out the back. Only 40% of the thrust is made by the hot gases, and it's like a propeller. It's that big fan that when you're sitting in a commercial airliner and you look in that engine, you see that big old wheel. 60% of the thrust is made from that fan blade. So it would be odd to have water put out the fire in a new tech airplane.
Right.
In the old airplanes, the turbojets, not the turbofans, that water did go through the hot section. So that might be, if it's a fair ways back, that might be the case, that it was a turbojet, not a turbofan.
Talk a little bit, since we're on this topic, about how a jet engine actually works.
All right, let's hold right there.
Because you're kind of breaking it apart.
Let's hold right there.
And I want to get to that. Is it just a propeller in a can, or is it actually something else that's happening there?
I bet you've never heard propeller in a can, have you? All right, we'll come back. More with Tom Messer when Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we just said. You know, sometimes when this fake world is being presented to us, we're like, what else do you guys get wrong? Right now, you're watching a sitting administration try to convince you that the high prices you're seeing everywhere don't exist. Yeah, they're trying to tell you, well, there's no inflation. It's all this, but we know when we look and we see what's happening to the price of everything, and we see what's happening to our IRA or our 401k. We can see those things. Well, our friends at Allegiance Gold said, you know, if we've learned anything from the past, you need to diversify right now by adding some precious metals. Physical gold and silver, if you prefer, can also be delivered securely right to your front door. But if you would rather do it another way with your IRA or 401k, they can help you with that too. But here's their approach, and it's different than others in the same industry. They focus on educating and developing a long-term strategy, and I would hear that long-term strategy that's right for you. Not boilerplate, not this is what we do for everybody. They look at your situation, my situation, Bubba's situation, and they say, all right, here's what you need to do. Now, right now, their best offer is available to you up to $2,500 of free silver on a qualifying purchase. So here's the URL you need to use. ProtectWithRickBubba.com. Put Rick and Bubba together. Don't put an and in there. ProtectWithRickBubba.com, or mention us if you call them at 844-790-9191, Allegiance Gold. They have some of the highest ratings in the industry. So call them 844-790-9191. Mention Rick and Bubba, or go to protectwithrickbubba.com. All right, so we're talking to Tom Messer. Before we talked about our sponsors today, Bubba asked you how a jet engine works. Is that what you were asking, Tom?
Just in general for so people to understand what's happening in that little can hanging under the wing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a mechanic. I do know how jet engines work. We could spend several hours.
Yeah. You don't have to go Whitney Pratt on us, but I mean,
it's compression. Those wheels that turn compress the air. There's a burner can in there where fuel is introduced and mixed. It gets really hot. It goes the other direction out the back of the can you're talking about. It turns some wheels back there that turn that big fan in the front that makes it all start over again. So we say it turns jet fuel into noise. But,
that's funny. Let's talk about you. This is where the game changes on expertise, and that's flying with instruments.
Correct.
Can't see. I've been on flights where I look around. I'm like, well, you can't see anything, and so now you can get disoriented real easy. You got to believe. Tell me about the training. You have to look at those instruments and you have to trust them. You told me even as long as you've been flying, that there are still times where your mind is trying to say this isn't right. Tell us about that.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Just any kind of little inner ear issue, or bending over down in the floor to pick up a book or a magazine or something, and come back up, and you look outside if you're in the clouds, and a lot of times there are clouds that are at an angle. They slope rather than be perfectly level. So your mind looks at them, it wants to go that way, but you look at the instruments and they say no, and you just have to trust. We do have more than one set of those. There are 3 sets in the airplanes I fly. There are a pilot, a co-pilot, and a standby attitude gyro. And you want to do a quick scan of all 3 of those. And that tells you whether or not what I'm seeing outside is correct or what I'm seeing inside is correct. Everybody gets it. You have to train yourself out of it.
Yeah. JFK?
And a gyro, a gyroscope you're talking about is a really wonderful little toy of physics that if
Correct.
you spin it, it stays in the same position no matter what you do. So it's reliable as to what's really up and what's down.
Right. We are actually beyond gyroscopes now with our flat panel displays. And, but it is still the same principle of the gyroscope.
So on JFK Jr., is it accurate to say this is what went wrong?
Most probably. The conditions that night, he was running late. They even tried to tie it some into his marital issues and that he had a lot of stress on him besides other things of just flying the airplane.
But he was kind of a young pilot.
He was a novice. He had about 300 hours. He had some instrument instruction, but he did not have an instrument rating.
So he should be under visual rules.
He was under visual rules, but it was night out over the water.
Right.
And there's lots of warnings to pilots, even places we go, like at New Orleans, there's if you land at the small airport there's a sign at the end of the runway that says, when you take off, you may lose visual contact with the horizon and all that. So,
reminder.
Yeah. So he went straight from somewhere in New York to Martha's Vineyard. It was about 40 miles over the water. And at some point along that way, he lost total visual contact with either the shore behind him or the island ahead of him. It became difficult. People said, well, didn't their airplane have an autopilot? It did have an autopilot. In my opinion, and it is my opinion, the autopilot is what got him in trouble. I think he realized I think he had the autopilot on, turned it off, began having a little difficulty in controlling the airplane, turned it back on, but by this time he had changed heading and changed altitude, but the autopilot tried to take him back to the point where he turned the autopilot off, which resulted in the airplane climbing and turning. He turned it back off, and it led into a vicious cycle. I'm very familiar with the autopilot that airplane had on it.
Okay.
I looked at the track that he did, the turns, the climbs, descent, and in my opinion, though the NTSB in their report never said anything about it, I think he had an issue trying to use the autopilot, turning it on and off, and it just kept messing him up. But that inevitably, it was spatial disorientation. That's what caused it.
So when you cut the autopilot off and then back on, it tries to go back to the point
some
where
do and some don't. That particular one did. So if he was straight and level at an altitude and turned it off, the autopilot brain, the memory, would be back at that altitude at that heading. So if he began to deviate and went down and turned, if you turn it back on, it's going to climb and go back up to that heading. So when you turn it on and it starts doing something other than what you think it should do,
it scares you. You think it's out of control.
You think it's out of control, and you turn it back off. And it led to a spiral. They call it a graveyard spiral.
Oh, boy.
And when the airplane is descending and turning, the force of gravity pushes you against the seat. Your inner ear says, I'm straight and level. But the airplane is turning. So if you look at the altimeter and you don't know what's going on, and you see it descending, you pull back. But if you pull back in a turn, it tightens the turn. And that was called the graveyard
spiral. And it put him in, So I was talking to you. I have seen and listened to air traffic controllers be in situations which you would say do not do, and that is always have a co-pilot.
Correct.
Your quote was, it is the cheapest life insurance you'll ever buy.
That's correct.
Right. But sometimes people fly and it's just passengers and one pilot.
Correct.
And in these cases, unfortunately, something happens with the pilot, heart attack, whatever, anything that would make them incoherent and unable to fly the plane.
Yes.
And I have watched and listened to air traffic controllers take people in the plane, get them in the seat, and get them on the ground. But you said that's only in good weather.
That's correct.
It couldn't happen if they don't have a visual. A
person in the back, realizing that something's wrong in the cockpit, comes forward. They stand little chance if it's if you're flying in the clouds, IFR, the visibility's low, the ceiling is low. There's very little chance that a controller, even if he's a pilot, could put himself into that airplane and help that person. The very first thing, it always amazes me, is can that person that moves from the back that comes forward even ask for help?
Right.
Because where do you push on the yoke to make the headset transmit?
Right.
Am I on the right frequency? It's just a near impossibility. It does happen, and that's why you hear so much about it, because it is a miracle when it does.
All right, we'll come back more with Tom Messer when Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues. So, Bubba, we love the products from Manscaped. I could tell that our guest Tom is looking at our magnificent hair, and he's wondering how does our hair look so good?
How do they do it?
Right. Well, part of it is the shampoo conditioner combination that we use from Manscaped. You know, everything about the Manscaped products, you can tell they're just designed for men. That's what, you know, men and women are equal, but they're not the same. To the packaging, I mean, we get the bottles you get, and they're metal.
They just do a good job with it.
And all and we love the trimmers that they have. I mean, for your beard and you know, anywhere you need to trim. I mean, this thing it's just better than the others. It's the lawnmower, the 4.0. And it has the light on the front of it, so you can see, like I know when I'm getting under my neck here, or you're needing to shave wherever.
That light is a game changer.
It's a game changer, and just the quality of the trimmer itself. And then there's the weed whacker. We wish we didn't need ear and nose hair trimmers, but we do.
It's sad, isn't it?
Yeah, we do. And then, of course, there's all kinds of things to use for men that help us to be desirable to the women, where we don't stink, we smell good. So if you're looking for, you know, your hygiene routine to be complete and have products designed for men, this is the products these products are available to you right now. We're getting you 20% off and free shipping using the code BUBBA20. BUBBA20 when you go to their website. So go to Manscaped, manscaped.com, 20% off and free shipping with the code BUBBA20.
This is the Rick and Bubba Show. Watch more at blazetv.com/Rick and Bubba. Rick and Bubba, Rick and Bubba.
Tom Messer is the guest. He is a former air traffic controller, still a pilot, and he has been helping us to talk about some historic things. Bubba, I do want to talk Sully with him if I could. The great Hudson River.
One of the great saves of all time.
So, and I know that, again, movies have to have drama. I don't recall that the captain came under as much scrutiny as they act like he did in the movie. Did he catch any flack that somehow this wasn't the right thing to do?
He did, because the so-called experts immediately tried to analyze what he had done and gave him the what if and if you'd done this, but they weren't there. They did come up with the idea that it takes a few moments of recognition to analyze a problem. If you were on the ground after it had happened and you said, well, if you'd immediately turned back, you might have done this or you might have done that. He did not have that luxury at that moment. He had to figure out what had happened and then deal with it.
And they didn't factor that into their timeline.
They didn't factor that into the timeline. When he brought that up later on, it was obvious that he did the right thing. I actually think the movie Sully was pretty good.
Good, okay.
They spent some time on that. Probably a lot because Sully himself put a lot of input into the movie. He did his training. They ran the checklist. He used his experience. He made proper decisions, and he saved those people's lives. In the air disasters, that's one of the things that bothers me so much about that is the deer in the headlights, the, oh my gosh, what's happening?
Right.
That's not what happens on a flight deck when
they go to work.
happens. They go to work and deal with it.
Yeah.
And they've been highly trained to do so.
They have been. That's correct.
Well,
I noticed he retired shortly after that, didn't he?
He did. He was reaching his retirement age.
What do they have him mandate?
65.
65. Wow.
And they're trying to...
I'm going to have to really get on it if I'm going to get my license.
You really are.
Yeah.
They're trying to extend it to 68 right now, and it has to do with the pilot shortage. They're trying to save these guys that are coming up on retirement now to give them another 3 years to try to get some people in.
Why do we have a pilot shortage right now? We keep hearing about it. We read about it all the time.
There's so much more aviation taking place. There's so many more airliners. There's so many more general aviation, corporate jet, business aircraft. It's very expensive to get to a point that you can fly one of those airplanes. Years of training, hundreds of hours, lots of cost. People just don't have that money. The airlines are beginning to train their own people. They're taking very low-time pilots, hiring them, giving them simulator time, putting them airplanes, flying them, helping them build the time.
I know they're doing that with the aviation schools, right? I mean, you go in, you're not in there too long at all. You've already been hired by somebody, and you're basically working on the job, getting your hours in, right?
And it's not only pilots, it's the mechanics, it's the people that maintain the avionics on the airplanes. It's just such an expanding, rapid growth industry that the new people coming up just can't keep up.
Do you think we're going to see more aircraft in the future, and it may be 50 years down the line, that are going to look like our drones that we have now, as opposed to the more standard, you think, propeller moving forward runway?
I do not. I just don't see electric aircraft, and I don't see pilotless aircraft carrying people. Even as good as the technology is, the mental ability to work on a problem, solve it, what should we do? I just don't think computers can do that.
But do you think the aircraft themselves will be, say, four propellers or four fans horizontally that are raising things up and down versus the more traditional?
I just don't know that I see a need for that, but there might be. I don't. Before we finish up, I want to go back and give my air traffic control friends applause, respect. That system works so good.
It's amazing.
Every day. Yeah. There are thousands of airplanes out there. They all require some form of instruction to get from A to B. You hardly ever hear of anything happening in the system. And it's just so... It's the dedication of the people that go to work every day and make it work.
You know, I'm amazed when I pull up these apps and things that show how many planes are in the air.
Unbelievable.
I mean, as you said, there's thousands every day that take off and land without any problem. You never hear about it.
That's right.
And then, lo and behold, when something does come along, years in between, it really makes the headlines.
It does, but it works awfully well.
It really does.
Yeah.
And the air traffic controllers, back to them, we've got a couple minutes, but really when you even look at those times, the rare times something does happen, it's rarely them.
Yeah.
It's usually something beyond their control. I bet the percentage is minuscule, if any, that the air traffic controller failed at their job and it caused it.
There are, when a loss of separation occurs, but there's no collision, they call it a deal. They say, we've had a deal. Well, a deal might be where an airplane was supposed to be 3 miles from another airplane, and it winds up 2 miles.
Right.
And that's not the separation required, but 2 miles is a long way.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And we're overcompensating because we want to, yeah.
That's right. So it does. It's a spectacular system. I trust it. Any pilot that's out there doing what I do, trust their life to the system.
Yeah, I think that part of air travel is all good. Sometimes you wish some of the people at the top that come up with some of the way that they are dealing with it from a money-making standpoint, it kind of puts these pilots, these flight attendants, of course, the air traffic controllers can be kind of isolated from it, where some of the things they do, like overbooking planes and things like that, anger people and upset people and bog the system down. I really feel bad for the people that are really good at what they do, having to deal with all that.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But everybody that I deal with is so dedicated to what they do, the pilots, the mechanics, the controllers. It's a great system.
And boy, it is the way to travel.
It is.
Man, it is.
It is.
It is the
There's
way.
something about flying above the clouds.
I don't drive anywhere.
I bet you know.
I have a small airplane. I use it for personal stuff, and I have some agreements with my owners that let me use the bigger stuff. If I want to go skiing or something, I do not want to.
Well, I talk about this all the time. There's things that I feel called to, by God, that if it wasn't for the miracle of airplanes, I would not be able to do them. It wouldn't work with the way we have to do a show every day and all that. I mean, it wouldn't work.
Right.
So it's
like a time machine.
It really is.
It is. I call it a time machine all the time.
How about that? Yeah. Tom, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure.
Appreciate what you've done, what you continue to do, and what all those that are still flying and doing air traffic control, what they continue to do for us. And thanks to each and every one of you for joining us on this edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast.